Across 3 chilling seasons, Hannibal Lecter exploited the minds of killers, FBI agents, and his closest friends. He wasn't just playing the game, but designing it. He was a brilliant psychiatrist, a refined man of taste, and a cannibal. But his most dangerous trait? He made us trust him. And by the time you realized who he really was, it was already too late. When NBC's Hannibal premiered in 2013, we thought we knew what to expect. After all, we'd seen Anthony Hopkins' iconic portrayal. We knew the story, right? Unlike only being about a cannibal doctor as many people anticipated, this series brought with it many other elements such as seduction, manipulation, and a love story so twisted it redefined what television could do. Here's the entire story. Season 1. We start the story with our boy Will Graham, an FBI profiler so gifted at understanding killers that it's literally destroying his mind. He can step into crime scenes and see exactly what happened, feel what the killer felt. It's a superpower that's also a curse. Jack Crawford, his boss, knows Will's burning out, so he does what any reasonable person would do. He sends him to a psychiatrist, and then we have Dr. Hannibal Lecter, who's impeccably dressed, cultured, sophisticated. He serves the most exquisite meals you've ever seen. He listens with genuine interest and seems to truly care about Will's well-being. He's exactly what Will needs, except he's also the very killer Will's been hunting. It's impressive how season 1 wasn't just about watching Hannibal manipulate Will, but also seeing him seduce us, the audience too. Every dinner party felt like a masterclass in elegance. Every therapy session seemed genuinely helpful. You found yourself thinking, maybe Hannibal really does care about Will, and that's exactly what made it so terrifying. While Will struggled with his gift, seeing murder scenes in his dreams, Hannibal was orchestrating them. The Chesapeake Ripper killings? That was him. The elaborate crime scenes that looked like art installations? His handiwork. And he was using his sessions with Will to get better at it. Every week, Hannibal would copy killers they'd caught, improving on their techniques. He'd take their methods and elevate them, turning murder into performance art. We saw how sophisticated Hannibal and the show highlighted this through every perfectly plated meal that probably contained someone's kidney. The season built to Will's complete psychological breakdown. Hannibal had been subtly poisoning him, making his mental state worse while pretending to treat him. By the finale, Will was in a psychiatric hospital, accused of being the very killer he'd been hunting. And who was his only visitor? His only supporter? Dr. Lecter, of course. The final shot of season 1 was Hannibal cooking what we later learned was Will's would-be replacement, another FBI trainee. He'd already moved on to his next project, his next mind to mold. Will was just the first course. Think you can predict where this story goes next? Trust me, you can't. Season 2 takes everything you think you know and flips it completely upside down. Season 2. The second season opened with Will exactly where Hannibal wanted him, behind bars, discredited, and completely at his mercy. Everyone thought Will had lost his mind. Everyone except Will himself, who finally realized the truth about his doctor. What followed was the most elaborate psychological chess match ever put on television. Will had to prove Hannibal's guilt while pretending to be insane, all while Hannibal continued his therapy sessions, still playing the concerned psychiatrist. The irony was suffocating. The only person who truly understood Will was the one who destroyed his life. This season introduced us to Hannibal's true masterpiece. His relationship with Will wasn't just exploitation, but love. A bitter, possessive, dangerous love, certainly, but love nonetheless. Hannibal not only caught Will in his web, but also wanted Will to choose to stay there. The show gave us some of its most disturbing imagery in this season. Human murals made from living people. A killer who turned his victims into musical instruments. A social worker buried alive in a field of flowers. Each crime was more elaborate than the last, and Hannibal was either directly responsible or inspiring them from behind the scenes. Yet here's what made it brilliant. You started understanding Hannibal's perspective. When he killed, it wasn't random violence. In his mind, he was culling the rude, the crude, the unworthy. He saw himself as evolution in action, removing what he considered inferior specimens. The show never asked you to agree with him, just to understand his logic. And somehow, that was more terrifying than mindless brutality. The season's midpoint brought us one of television's most shocking moments. Will, finally free and working with Jack Crawford to catch Hannibal, seemed to be getting close. They had a plan. They were going to expose him. Everything was falling into place. Then, Hannibal figured it out. The finale of season 2 remains one of the most brutal episodes I've ever seen. Rather than Hannibal killing his enemies fast, he destroys them emotionally first. He gutted Jack Crawford in his own office. He exploited Will's surrogate daughter into trying to kill him. He turned Will's own mind against him one final time. The season ended with Will and Hannibal finally honest with each other. No more games, no more pretense. Will admitted he'd started to enjoy their dynamic, started to understand Hannibal's worldview, and Hannibal revealed just how much Will meant to him by doing the one thing no one expected. He ran. Not before leaving Will bleeding out on his kitchen floor, of course. Even Hannibal's acts of love came with violence attached. As sirens wailed in the distance, Hannibal disappeared into the night with his psychiatrist, Dr. Bedelia du Maurier, leaving Will to wonder if he'd created a monster or simply revealed one that was always there. The question hanging over everything, in trying to catch Hannibal, had Will become him? The third season would answer that question in the most surprising ways. The answer might disturb you more than anything that came before. Season 3. Of great importance to note is that this season split into two distinct halves, each more visually stunning and psychologically complex than anything the show had done before. The first half took us to Florence, Italy, where Hannibal had assumed a new identity as a museum curator. Because of course he had. Where else would a man who turns murder into art end up? Will survived Hannibal's goodbye gift and spent months recovering, both physically and mentally. When he finally tracked Hannibal to Europe, what he found wasn't the monster he expected, but something worse, a version of himself he might become. Florence gave us the show's most operatic moments. Hannibal, living as Dr. Fell, was thriving in a city that understood the beauty in violence, surrounded by Renaissance art that depicted humanity's darkest impulses with stunning beauty. He'd found his perfect home. The cat-and-mouse game between Will and Hannibal reached new heights here. They weren't just hunter and prey anymore, but two halves of the same whole, drawn together by forces neither could fully control. Will had spent so long inside Hannibal's mind that he'd started thinking like him. The line between them had blurred beyond recognition. Inspector Potsy's investigation brought back Hannibal's past, including the return of Mason Verger, a victim who'd survived Hannibal's therapy and wanted revenge. The show had always been violent, but Verger's story pushed it into new territory. This wasn't just about murder anymore, it was about the lasting damage Hannibal left in his wake. The Florence arc climaxed with Hannibal's capture, but not before he'd orchestrated one final performance. Even in defeat, he was still directing the show, still pulling strings, still seducing everyone around him into his twisted worldview. The second half of season 3 brought everyone back to America for the final confrontation. Will was struggling with his identity, torn between the man he'd been and the one Hannibal had helped him become. Hannibal, imprisoned but still manipulating everyone around him, continued his psychological games from behind bars. This is where I want to pause and ask you something, and be honest in the comments below. At what point did you start sympathizing with Hannibal? Because if you watched this show, you did. The writing was so sophisticated, the performances so compelling, that you found yourself understanding his perspective. That's the real horror of Hannibal. Not the violence, but how it made you complicit in his worldview. The season built toward Francis Dollarhide, the Red Dragon, a killer inspired by Hannibal's work. This was Hannibal's final gift, his ultimate manipulation. He'd created a killer specifically designed to force Will into making an impossible choice. The series finale gave us what I considered an ideal ending. Will, finally understanding what he'd become, made the only choice that made sense. Standing on a cliff with Hannibal, having just killed together for the first time, he embraced his dark side completely. Then, in an act that was both salvation and damnation, he pulled them both over the edge. The final scene, Will and Hannibal falling through the air, locked in an embrace that was part dance, part murder, part love story, summed up everything the show had been building toward. They were perfect for each other in the most terrible way possible. Neither could exist without the other, so they chose to fall together rather than live apart. Hannibal was a 3-season meditation on the nature of evil, the seductive power of sophistication, and how thin the line really is between civilization and savagery. Brian Fuller created something that was simultaneously the most beautiful and most disturbing thing on television. The show's cancellation after 3 seasons remains one of TV's greatest tragedies. Not because the story was incomplete, that ending was perfect, because there will never be anything quite like it again. What did you think of Hannibal's final choice? Was Will's decision the only way the story could end? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of your interpretations of this show have blown my mind.